Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got a really fascinating stack of historical sources lined up for you, and we're basically exploring a genuine mystery.
Yeah, a huge one.
Right. So I want you to picture this. It is 1989. You are looking at one of the most powerful, heavily armed empires the modern world has ever seen, which is the massive, sprawling superpower of the USSR.
Oh, yeah. A total behemoth.
Exactly. And it simply splinters, it breaks apart into all these several independent countries, essentially collapsing under its own weight and internal pressures.
Which was, at the time, completely shocking to a lot of people.
Totally. Now, I want you to contrast that image with another immense, highly diverse nation that was born just a few decades earlier in 1947, and that is India.
Right.
We are talking about a country born out of this deeply painful partition, grappling with unimaginable poverty, and a landmass containing more than 20 major languages, hundreds of minor ones, several major religions, and this is wild, over 500 princely states.
Yeah, literally hundreds of independent monarchs, maharajas, nawabs, all of that.
Right, and they all had to somehow be convinced to join one unified nation. I mean, by all conventional logic, a country that's staggeringly diverse should have shattered a dozen times over.
Oh, absolutely.
Yet it has managed to stay united for over 7 decades now.
It is arguably one of the most remarkable political survival stories of the modern era. I mean, when you put those two histories side by side, you have two massive, diverse nations that both utilized a federal structure of governance, but with drastically different outcomes.
Yeah, complete opposites.
Right. One completely dissolved, while the other navigated its way through immense growing pains to become the world's largest democracy.
And exploring that contrast is exactly our mission for this deep dive. We are looking at the invisible machinery that holds a diverse country together. We're going to explore how power is shared, how it's bitterly fought over, and why the written rules of any country are really only half the story.
Yeah, the written rules are just the starting line, really.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can figure out why India's machinery didn't break, we really need to understand what that machinery actually is. And the core concept here from our sources is federalism.
Right. So at its most basic structural level, federalism is an institutional mechanism designed to accommodate two sets of polities.
Okay, so 2 levels of government.
Exactly. You establish one government at the regional or state level, and then another overarching government at the national level.
Yeah.
And because of this dual structure, the people living in a federal system naturally develop dual identities and dual loyalties.
Which I always think of with the analogy of being a student in a massive high school.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, you have fierce pride in your specific homeroom, right? Or your class year. You fiercely compete against the other divisions in sports or academics. That's your regional identity.
Right, your immediate surroundings.
Exactly, but at the end of the day, you all wear the same school colors, you root for the school against rival districts, and you take pride in the whole institution, which is the national identity. You really need both to have a functioning school spirit.
That actually captures the dynamic perfectly. Each level of government is autonomous in its own specific sphere, with distinct powers and responsibilities. But simply writing a constitution and, calling yourself a federation doesn't guarantee that the school spirit, to use your analogy, will survive.
Right, because things can go very wrong.
Oh, completely. The USSR broke apart largely because of a lethal dose of excessive centralization.
Too much power at the top.
Exactly. There was this massive concentration of power in Moscow, and Russia effectively dominated the other regions. So places like Uzbekistan, which had their own ancient, independent languages and distinct cultures, they were essentially suffocated.
Wow. So it's a cautionary tale of a center squeezing too hard until the regions just rebel and break away.
Yep.
But let's flip the scenario for a second. What happens if the center doesn't squeeze hard enough? Does the whole thing just drift apart?
It absolutely can. And the West Indies Federation is a prime example of that exact failure.
Okay, so what happened there?
Well, like India, the West Indies was colonized by the British, and in 1958 they formed a federation. But unlike the USSR, their central government was incredibly weak.
Oh, so they swung too far the other way.
Right. The economy of each individual island unit was highly independent. And the political competition among those islands was so fierce that the central authorities simply couldn't hold them together. I mean, the entire federation formally dissolved by 1962.
They couldn't even make it 5 years.
Barely 4, yeah.
It's crazy. But the reality of geopolitics meant they couldn't totally survive on their own either, right? I mean, small island nations face a lot of external pressure.
Which is exactly what forced them to find a pragmatic middle ground a decade later. So in 1973, they signed the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which created the Caribbean Community.
So more as a compromise.
Yeah, it was a fascinating compromise where they established joint authorities, things like a common legislature, a Supreme Court, eventually a shared currency, but they remained independent sovereign islands.
Ah, I see.
They realized they couldn't live together as one single country, but they couldn't survive entirely separately either.
Right. And then going through the sources, you have those dark scenarios where federalism fails because the internal divisions run so incredibly deep that trust just evaporates entirely. Like, let's look at Nigeria in the mid-20th
Oh
century.
yeah, Nigeria is a really intense example.
Right. You've got this massive, resource-rich country, but the divisions aren't just, lines on a map.
No, Nigeria is highly instructive because
Yeah.
it shows what happens when identities really collide.
Yeah.
You had three major ethnic groups, the Yoruba in the west, the Igbo in the east, and the Hausa Fulani in the north.
All right.
And when they attempted to form a federal constitution in 1950, the attempts of these groups to spread their political influence led to intense escalating fears.
Because it wasn't just ethnicity, right? You layer religious differences on top of that, and then you add a massive economic conflict over who gets to control the staggering revenues from the region's oil resources. I mean, it's just a recipe for utter paranoia.
Paranoia that eventually resulted in a military regime. I mean, you can actually track the decay of trust just by looking at their laws over time.
Really? How so?
Well, in their 1960 Constitution, the federal and regional governments jointly controlled the police force. They were still trying to cooperate.
Okay.
But jump ahead to the military-supervised Constitution of 1979, and no state was allowed to have any civil police at all.
Wow. So they completely stripped them of that power.
Exactly. The central authority simply did not trust the regions with armed law enforcement. And what's fascinating here is that federalism is clearly not a fixed set of scientific principles. You can't just copy-paste a federal constitution from one country to another and expect it to work.
Right, because the human element is too messy.
Real politics, cultural history, ideology, and above all trust are the actual gears that determine if the system survives.
So knowing how incredibly fragile this balance is, knowing that too much central power shatters the system like glass, and too little central power lets it dissolve into the wind, we arrive at India in 1947.
Right, and the framers of the Indian Constitution were looking at a nearly impossible balancing act.
I can't even imagine the pressure.
It was immense. The Constituent Assembly realized very quickly that they couldn't just ignore the immense diversity of the subcontinent. It demanded formal recognition.
Because people of drastically different regions and languages had to be able to govern themselves regionally.
Right. It was the only logical path to prevent an immediate civil war and, build a functioning democratic government.
But, and this is a detail that completely blew my mind when going through our sources today, despite spending years creating this intricate system to balance regional and national power, the Constitution of India does not actually contain the word federation.
Not even once.
Not even once. Article 1 literally declares, India, that is Bharat, shall be a union of states.
It is a brilliant, highly deliberate choice of words.
Really? Why avoid the word federation?
Well, they engineered a federal system in practice, but they emphasized the word union to underscore that the country was ultimately one unified entity. They were sending a legal and, honestly, psychological message. The states are united, and no state has the right to secede and break the union apart.
I get it. And the map of this union has been completely fluid. Like, if you look at a political map of India from 1947 and compare it to 2017, they look like entirely different planets.
Oh, the internal borders changed drastically.
Yeah, boundaries shifted constantly, new states were literally carved out of old ones, and names morphed based on the linguistic and cultural wishes of the people living there. Mysore became Karnataka, Madras became Tamil Nadu.
The center essentially kept redrawing the internal borders to keep the peace.
But wait, hold on. I have to push back here on behalf of anyone listening. If the Constitution intentionally avoids the word federation, and the central government in New Delhi can just pull out a giant eraser, wipe out a state's borders, and change its name without asking, are we really looking at a federation here?
Right, that's the big question.
To me, that just sounds like a centralized empire playing dress-up.
It's a very fair skepticism, and it's actually a debate that constitutional scholars have been having for decades.
Yeah.
But to determine if it's a true federation, we have to look past the changing map and examine the explicit, written division of powers.
Okay, the actual rule book.
Right. A true federation must have a constitutionally guaranteed separation of who does what. The The center can't just wake up one day and dictate every aspect of daily life. The powers must be legally walled off.
Okay, let's look at that rule book then. The Indian Constitution divides power into three main lists to create those walls, right? First, you have the Union list. This is the realm where the central government has exclusive, undisputed control. We're talking big picture, national survival defense, foreign affairs, currency, banking, and airways.
And the logic there is pure practicality. Imagine the absolute chaos if each individual state was negotiating its own peace treaties with foreign nations.
Oh, man, that would be a disaster.
Or if you had to exchange your currency every time you crossed a state border just to buy groceries.
Right. Impossible to manage.
Those functions require a single, unified voice.
Makes sense. Then you have the state lists. These are the regional concerns where the state legislature gets to make the laws. This includes agriculture, police, public health, land policies, and trade within the state.
And the why here is really crucial. Like, why give police to the state?
Because they know the area.
Exactly. Local law enforcement requires a deep, intimate understanding of local language, culture, and geography. A central police force sitting in New Delhi wouldn't know the first thing about handling a complex land dispute in, say, a remote village in Kerala.
Yeah, that context is everything.
State governments understand the local context best, so they are given control over the areas that most directly impact a citizen's day-to-day life.
Right. That brings us to the third list, the concurrent list, which includes shared concerns where both the union and the states can pass laws. This covers things like education, forests, and trade unions.
Yep, shared responsibilities.
Oh, and the framers also planned for the unknown with something called residuary powers.
The framers were incredibly forward-thinking on this. They knew they couldn't predict the future of human society.
Right.
So they created a legal catch-all. Any matter not mentioned in any of the three lists, like cyber laws or digital privacy, which obviously didn't exist in 1950, automatically falls under the control of the union legislature.
Got it. You know, reading through how these lists divide up the actual money and resources, I couldn't shake this one analogy from our source notes. Yeah, the economic division of power feels like a really lopsided household. Imagine a couple where one partner holds all the high-paying jobs, controls the main banking accounts, and manages all the big investments. That's the central government.
Okay, I follow.
Meanwhile, the other partner is tasked with doing all the grueling daily household chores, doing the grocery shopping, fixing the plumbing, and making sure the kids are healthy and educated. That's the state government managing agriculture, police, and public health. But the catch is, the second partner is expected to manage all of those massive daily crises on a meager allowance doled out by the first partner.
Wow. The lopsided household is actually a brilliant way to conceptualize it. And imagine what happens when the partner controlling the bank account suddenly decides they don't like how the groceries are being bought.
Right, they just cut off the cash.
Exactly. They can just tighten the purse strings or freeze the funds entirely. That's essentially what happens with central grants. This financial centralization is the absolute bedrock of India's specific flavor of federalism.
So the states are doing all the heavy lifting, but with no money.
The states have immense ground-level responsibilities, but very limited independent sources of revenue. They are structurally dependent on financial assistance from the center.
Here's where it gets really interesting. You'd think giving the center all the money, the residuary powers, and the ability to literally erase a state's borders would just make the states resentful and weak.
Yeah, you would think so.
So does giving the center this much power inherently cripple the states, or does it somehow force them to be cooperative?
Oh, this is the best part. Constitutional lawyers absolutely love arguing about this specific tension.
I bet.
The framers didn't just want unity for the sake of unity. They were looking at a country deeply scarred by centuries of colonial extraction, widespread poverty, illiteracy, and immense inequalities of wealth.
Just massive systemic problems.
Huge problems. And they believed that to force massive, rapid socioeconomic changes, you needed a center made of pure iron. You couldn't just leave it up to the individual states to figure out how to pull millions of people out of poverty. You needed national planning and forceful coordination.
That actually perfectly explains the role of the Planning Commission mentioned in the sources.
Okay.
India adopted centralized planning as the ultimate instrument for rapid economic progress, which pulled economic decision-making even further into New Delhi's orbit.
Right.
The union government basically uses its discretion to give out grants and loans, essentially steering state policies with federal cash.
And this unitary bias, this intentional heavy tilt toward a strong center, goes way beyond just money.
It does.
Oh, yeah. If you read the emergency provisions of the Constitution, the Parliament can just flip a legal switch in times of crisis and boom, the whole federal structure vanishes overnight.
Wait, really? It just disappears?
Legally, yes. The federal polity legally transforms into a highly centralized, unitary system, and the national parliament can suddenly make laws on subjects that are normally strictly fenced off on the state list. It is a wildly powerful piece of legal engineering.
That is wild. And even without declaring a national emergency, the everyday administrative control is intense. Let's break this down for a second. Every state has a governor, right?
Correct.
But this governor isn't elected by the state's people. They're appointed by the central government, and they have the power to actually recommend dismissing the elected state government.
Yep, it's a huge lever of power.
Then you have the All India Services.
IAS and IPS.
Right, the Indian Administrative Service and the Indian Police Service. To put this in everyday terms for you listening, imagine the federal government hiring the chief of police and the top civil administrators for your specific city, and your local mayor has absolutely no power to fire them.
It's crazy to think about.
These officers serve the states, they run the local administration, but they are ultimately chosen by and controlled by the central government.
The state can't even take disciplinary action against them.
Unbelievable.
And if there was any lingering doubt about who is ultimately the boss in this relationship, just look at Article 257 of the Constitution. It explicitly states that the executive power of a state cannot impede the executive power of the union. And crucially, it says the union can give direct, binding instructions to a state government if it feels its authority is being challenged.
It's the ultimate constitutional because I said so clause.
It really is.
Yeah.
But here's where we have to step away from the documents. A constitution, no matter how brilliantly written, is still just a piece of paper.
Right, it's theory versus practice.
It sets the rules of the game, but the actual messy working of a federation is determined by the players on the field, the political parties. And human nature dictates that when the rulebook heavily favors one side, the other side will eventually organize, push back, and demand more leverage.
Which brings us to how real boots-on-the-ground politics totally reshaped this center-state relationship over the decades. For a long time after independence, the same political party, the Congress Party, ruled both at the center in New Delhi and in almost all the individual states.
Right. Until the mid-1960s, center-state relations were mostly smooth. Almost stiflingly so.
Because they were all on the same team.
Exactly. It's incredibly easy to cooperate when the prime minister of the country and the chief minister of a state belong to the exact same political family, share the same ideology, and attend the same high-level party meetings. Disagreements were just handled internally, behind closed doors.
But then the 1960s happen, that single-party dominance declines, and suddenly you have opposition parties winning state elections. The era of total agreement is over.
And immediately you start seeing the friction.
Right. These newly empowered state governments start protesting, loudly claiming the center is interfering unnecessarily. They start demanding real autonomy.
Because they were finally feeling the squeeze of that lopsided household budget you mentioned. They were facing angry voters who wanted better schools and hospitals, but they had no financial freedom to deliver.
So they push back.
Hard. This led to very specific, documented demands for financial autonomy.
And we have a great historical example of this from the sources from 1977.
Ah, yes.
The Left Front government in West Bengal actually published a formal document demanding a total restructuring of center-state relations. Now, we are just presenting this to convey the ideas of the time, not taking any political sides here.
Of course.
But they essentially drew a line in the sand and said, we need independent, constitutionally guaranteed sources of revenue. We cannot effectively govern if we have to keep traveling to New Delhi with a begging bowl every time we need to fix a road.
And it wasn't just them either. Other states, like Tamil Nadu and Punjab, along with various regional parties, were echoing very similar demands for more power.
And this sustained political pushback fundamentally changed the nature of Indian federalism.
It really did. By the time we hit the 1990s, the era of single-party dominance at the center was completely over. We entered the complex, chaotic era of coalition politics.
Meaning, the national government in New Delhi simply couldn't form a majority in parliament without securing the support of several different regional parties from various states.
Exactly. Suddenly, the central government couldn't just dictate terms or casually dismiss state governments because their very political survival depended on the cooperation of these regional leaders.
It totally flipped the dynamic.
It forced a newfound practical respect for regional diversity. The center had to negotiate, compromise, and share resources rather than just command. This is what political scientists often refer to as a transition into a more mature federalism.
So what does this all mean? We started by looking at a dusty rulebook that seemed to give all the money and the power to a central authority, but we end up seeing that a constitution is really a living, breathing arrangement.
Absolutely.
It's constantly being negotiated, tested, and stretched by the chaotic political realities on the ground.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this political evolution is likely what saved India from the tragic fate of the USSR or the military regimes of Nigeria.
Wow, so the pushback saved the country.
Yes, the Constitution created a strong, ironclad center to forcibly hold the country together during its fragile, chaotic early years. But, and this is the key, the democratic structure allowed for peaceful political pushback.
Right, they had a release valve.
When the states felt squeezed, they didn't have to start an armed rebellion. They could use the electoral system to force coalition politics and demand a seat at the table. It was the flexibility of the political system, acting within the rigid framework of the Constitution, that maintained the balance.
It really makes you realize that federalism isn't just some abstract concept reserved for constitutional lawyers and dusty libraries. It's highly relevant to anyone trying to navigate a complex system in their own life.
Oh, for sure.
Whether you are looking at office politics in a massive multinational corporation, trying to manage a sprawling community organization, or analyzing the latest national elections, understanding how power is distributed, and crucially, how conflicting identities are accommodated, is the ultimate key to keeping any large group of people moving in the same direction without breaking apart.
It's all about managing tension, not eliminating it. But this actually raises an important question, something for you to mull over after we wrap up today.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've seen that the actual working of a federation depends far more on the political parties currently in power than the written constitution itself. So what happens to a country when regional identities eventually become entirely stronger than the national one, in a system that was originally designed by its framers to have an ironclad center?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Right. If the political players on the ground no longer value the union part of the equation, can the written rules alone prevent the system from fracturing?
That is a heavy, fascinating puzzle to walk away with. It really brings us right back to that opening image of the USSR splintering in 1989. The invisible machinery of federalism is always humming in the background, but it only works as long as the people operating it actually believe in the machine. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some new tools to understand the complex power dynamics playing out in the world around you. Until next time, keep questioning the rules of the game.